Hello and welcome to English Digest. I'm Seb.
And I'm Elsie. So how are you, Seb?
A little bit bored, I won't lie. It's been raining a lot recently, so I've been spending a lot of time at home. I really don't think I've ever lived in a city that's as wet as Taipei. Still, I guess a little rain is never a bad thing. Earlier this year, I remember there was a drought, 旱灾, in Taiwan, and all the rivers were drying up. It was pretty crazy. Does Taipei get a lot of droughts?
Not really, but we did have that serious drought earlier this year. So luckily it's raining a lot, but at the same time, it's so annoying. Right?
It is, definitely.
So, we don't get droughts that often, but you are right, the weather here is just so hot and wet. What about in the UK? Do you get a lot of droughts?
The UK, believe it or not, does suffer from droughts from time to time. So unlike in Taiwan, where the summer is quite wet, the summer is drier in the UK, even though the UK is a wet country. Sometimes in the summer, the government even has to implement something called a hosepipe ban. Most people in the UK have gardens, and they water them using hoses, which is 水管. But during the ban, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use your hose. And this helps save water, so we make sure we don't deplete or use up the water in our reservoirs.
Oh, reservoir. 你是说水库吗?
I'm glad you asked, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. 水库, reservoirs. It's a big, normally man-made lake or artificial lake that is used to store large amounts of water. Cities use a lot of water every day, so how much that they often need, so much they often need more water than is available in the surrounding rivers and lakes. Reservoirs help us make sure that water is always readily available for those that need it. So reservoirs still, though, they play a very important role in our daily lives, not only because they give us access to running water, but also because they can be important indicators of changes in the weather and climate. When the rain stops falling, reservoirs are often the first bodies of water to change, and the water might drop significantly in the summer. That's one reason why it's important that authorities keep an eye on the water levels of reservoirs, which brings us to today's topic.
OK, 所以今天的主题是呢，近年来啊，全台各地水情蛙警报，许多水库呢面临缺水危机。那本图它显示增文水库西元2020年的储水量，请你依据图表的内容写一篇英文作文，文长至少要120个单字。OK， 所以这边说呢，文分两段，第一段描述图表的内容，第二段呢，则要说明限水对日常生活带来哪些不便，或是想象啊，如果2天停水，那要怎么样应对
Exactly. So we need to achieve a couple of things when we are writing about graphs or data. First, we need to accurately and clearly describe what the graph shows. Is the water level rising? Is it falling? Are there any fast or slow changes? How long has the data been recorded for? Stuff like that. Next, we need to develop the information. I like to call this finding a story within the data. So what is the graph telling us? Is the reservoir in danger of drying up? Is there going to be a flood? Is there another problem we need to discuss? Think about the most interesting or unusual information in the graph and explain those points to your readers in an objective and neutral tone.
OK， 那这边有一个水库小补充的知识哦，就是呢，水库管理单位啊，他们会依据每座水库的降雨季节特性、供水需求等等的因素来订定上下限的储水量，所以呢，每个月的上下限才会有所不同。
All right, let's see how we should develop an approach for this assignment.
OK， 第一个，图表写作的常见步骤，也就是我们要先分析图表，确实描述图表所传递的讯息，这个时候不要加入你主观的意见哦，图表上面有显示的你再说就好。再来第二个，解读图表的内容，描述及比较图表间的差异，这边一样，请你不要放入自己主观的意识。再来才是根据图表内容加上自己的看法或是实际的例证， 以呼应主题。
Exactly. So as we previously mentioned, you're going to want to begin by describing the data in the graph. Notice that I said describing, not explaining. We only want to tell people what we can see in the graph. So at this point, in the first paragraph, we might want to discuss what the graph is measuring, how big the sample is, and how long the data was gathered over. Once you have fully and clearly described what you can see in the graph, you can move on to explaining the data. This will be the second paragraph of your assignment. Here, we can talk about what the data represents. Is it a big change, a climate catastrophe, the biggest drought in recorded history, positive environmental changes? To add to this, you can also add your own personal insights. How do you feel about the data? Does it worry you? Do you see it as encouraging? However, try to back up your opinions with facts, okay? We don't just want to say, I reckon, or I think that. We just want to add a bit of elaboration on the point. We want an informed opinion that is an opinion which is worth reading.
OK， 再来呢，第二个，分析图表的时候，我们要注意什么呢？也就是要清楚理解本图表的主题，图表中的 X 和 Y 轴以及每条折线分别代表什么，我们都要知道哦。再来就是呢，根据提示来描写。第一段，它是要描述图表内容，因此呢，我们只需要客观的分析图表显示的资讯就好了，避免增加过多的个人观点。描述的内容呢，要是图表当中具有意义而且值得描述的数值、相应之处或者是变化。因此呢，不需要将图表中所有的内容都写进文章当中。第二段呢，才将自己的经验或是看法融入写作。那有一个小技巧要注意的是呢，就是折线图多半用来强调趋势，因此分析折线图的重点在于判别本图表的交汇点以及交汇点以外的趋势走向。那再来呢，就是除了内容流畅完整之外，文法的结构组织、字词的搭配也要注意，修辞也是你要小心的地方。你自然的去运用它，都是会让你的文章加分。那除了使用正确的字句来描述数值的变化之外，运用不同的单字来表达，更能够增加文章的深度哦。
Right, as with all of our writing assignments, this is a really good opportunity for you to demonstrate your understanding of English with a wide vocabulary. When we're writing this passage, use synonyms to make your writing more interesting. Synonyms are 同义词, different words that have the same or similar meanings. So varied use of synonyms will make your writing much more interesting to the reader than if you repeat the same words over and over again. Take a look at this example passage. Average water fell 3 times across 2020. Between January and June, they fell by 300 centimeters. From July to August, they fell by 50 centimeters. And after September, they fell by 100 centimeters. It's kind of dull, right? One of the reasons why it's boring is that I use the word fell 4 times in 2 sentences, which is very repetitive. Let's look at it again using synonyms. Average water levels fell 3 times across 2020. Between January and June, they decreased by 300 centimeters, by another 50 centimeters from July to August, and after September, they dropped again by 100 centimeters. Writing it this way is much more interesting. Next time you do one of these writing assignments, give yourself 5 minutes at the end to review what you've written. See if you're repeating any words unnecessarily, and if you can, see if you can use similar words that replace them and make your writing more interesting. Okay, let's get on to the brainstorming section of our assignment. All right, after all this talk of graphs, I think we actually need to look at a graph. If you look at your magazines now, you'll see that we have this beautiful graph with 3 lines, one green one blue, and one yellow, representing the water levels of the Zhengwen Reservoir. What we're looking at here is a line graph, and it's easy for us to tell. Why? Because it has a line running across it from one side to the other. Line graphs are often used to demonstrate changes over time of one value, or to compare different changes of multiple values over time. So we can see here that the line graph is showing us how the water decreased and increased throughout 2020. So we can see that the reservoir in this chart is the water levels are changing. So let's talk a little bit about what we can see here. What can we see in this graph?
OK， 所以呢，在这个图表上面，当然标题你要注意，好，它是增文水库，这个就代表整个图表的主题。那再来呢，左边它是合计有效的蓄水量，还有X 轴是时间月份。那再来就是要注意到上线跟下线这个位置，还有年，好，2020年，所以总共是3个不同的折线。那上线的话呢，代表 the maximum storage level。下线呢是 the minimum level， 那这个就是我们刚刚有提到的上线下线会根据这个不同的水量来做决定。OK， 所以蓝色线的部分呢，就是 how much water is in the reservoir.
I see. Okay, that's going to be very important for us when we come to write about it, because that one is really showing us, I think when the blue line is at the lowest point, when it's below the minimum storage level, then that could mean a real problem.
Right.
We'll get back to that in a second, but first we need to talk about the outline for our graph writing. So as we've talked about before, an outline is a planning device that will help you lay out your ideas so you have a well-balanced passage. And you don't just need to remember this skill for your exams, it's also good to do it for any writing assignment, even if you're doing, I don't know, some creative writing. An outline is always very helpful. Okay, so if we look at our outline here, the example one we have, we can see that it follows a lot of the points that we talked about earlier when we were talking about how to write about graphs. So the passage begins by sticking to description, so just talking about what we can see in the graph. Actually, a lot of the things that Elsie just mentioned. As we can see with our topic sentence and supporting points, each sentence talks about something you can see in the graph. So it tells you what the green line means, what the yellow line means, what the blue line means. And that's going to be very important later on when we start explaining why the graph is important and what the graph means. This is very important for all kinds of descriptive writing assignments. We need to make sure that the reader understands everything that we understand, because if they don't, they're not going to be able to get your conclusion, and the whole thing is just going to be wasted words. So stick to the description first, and then move on to what that might mean for the reader. Okay, let's take a closer look at the first paragraph.
Okay, the first paragraph 也是第一个段落，当然有一个主题句 topic sentence number 1 就是 The graph shows the water levels in the 增文 reservoir. 那有3个小点是要注意的，也就是 the green line is the maximum storage level. 我们刚刚讲到的绿线是它的下限 ，the yellow line is the 绿线是它的上限，然后呢黄线 the yellow line is the minimum level 是它的下限。那再来呢 the blue line shows how much water is in the reservoir. 蓝色的线呢，就是要告诉你水库里面有多少的水。
Exactly. So when we're talking about the maximum and minimum here, we're talking about the maximum the government, I think, thinks should be in the water, in the reservoir, and the minimum is the smallest amount that should be in the reservoir. So the minimum doesn't mean that it's empty, it just means that any less is going to cause problems for people's daily lives. So that's the smallest amount the government thinks should be in the reservoir.
没错，所以你会看到它的第一段呢，它讲出增文水库这个主题之后，就在陈述它在图表上面看到的资讯，这样就可以了。And when the blue line drops below the yellow line, what does it mean, Seb?
It's not good news. That means, as the outline says, there's a water shortage if the blue line drops below the yellow line. Okay, so that means that there's less water in the reservoir than the government says should be the minimum amount. So that means that there's not enough water to go to Taipei or Tainan, or I don't know where the water from the Zhengwen reservoir goes, but there's not enough water for the people who use that reservoir. So, as the article says, water levels were low and there was a water shortage starting in August, right? So if you look back at the graph, you can see that August, number 8, you can see that the blue line crosses the yellow, and after that, there's actually less water in the reservoir than the government wants there to be. What does this mean? Well, we're going to get into that into paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 is interesting because it goes into what the chart means for the reader. So now we've described everything, we can explain why it's important. I think this is quite important for a topic like water reserves or reservoirs, because many readers don't have a good idea of what reservoirs are and why they're important and what they mean for our daily lives. So it's really important for this assignment to really get into the meaning of the graph. Anyway, the second paragraph says, our water is cut off for 2 days every week. That's our topic sentence. And then it explains what this means. So it says, we can't take showers or do laundry. And B, we fill tubs with water and use this for washing dishes. So this is showing us kind of how these water shortages affect people. And it shows what it means for people in Taiwan specifically. The concluding sentence tells us what we can learn from this graph. Concluding sentence, I hope that there are new ways to save water in the future. So it seems that the concluding sentence says that the writer is not happy with the water-saving measures that they currently use when the water level drops below the minimum. So we're getting a lot of information in this outline, and I think that's very good. It's showing us what we can see in the graph, it's showing us what this means, and it's showing the informed opinion of the writer as well. So we get a very good full view of the Zhengwen reservoir and what that means for readers. Okay, let's take a quick break now, and then we will go through the basic sample and the advanced sample and some writing tips for your assignment. Basic sample. The graph shows the water levels in the Zhengwen Reservoir in 2020. The green line shows the maximum storage level, and the yellow line represents the minimum level. The blue line shows how much water is actually in the reservoir. If the blue line drops below the yellow line, it means there's a water shortage and the government will order water-saving measures. As is shown in the graph, water levels were low for most of 2020, and from August onward, there was a water shortage. The required water-saving measures really disrupt daily life, as our water is cut off for 2 days in a row every week. On these days, we can't take showers or do laundry. We can fill tubs with water and use this for washing dishes and taking sponge baths, but it's still very inconvenient. I really hope society can find new ways to save water in the future. Okay, so this is a really good basic sample. It covers everything we needed to talk about to cover the assignment. Elsie, there was a couple of phrases that you liked from this sample, wasn't there?
Right. 所以呢，在第一段呢，你看到它的开头是 The graph shows， 这个同学们可以把它学起来哦。The graph shows or the graph shows that 代表图表显示，你可以用它来开头，然后带出你在图表当中看到的内容。那再来呢，就是我们还看到第一段，好，大概在倒数1、2句的地方 ，as is shown in the graph。代表的就是如图表所显示，所以你也可以用它来开头，然后带出图表的内容。As is shown in the graph， 逗号之后接着下去写。那再来还有一个，像我们要叙述时间，从几月开始？从8月开始，我们可以说的 from August onward 这个字哈，就是时间继续往前走，所以从8月开始到9月、10月接下来的时间。
Exactly, after August or from August.
Right.
Okay, so I think one thing which is also good to look at is the second sentence of the first paragraph. The green line shows the maximum storage level and the yellow line represents the minimum level. So here is a really good example of how you can use synonyms to make it more interesting, because both show and represent here mean the same thing. They're saying what the green line and the yellow line represent. But because we're using two synonyms, we get a bit more variety in this sentence. So this is one way that you can make your writing a little bit more interesting. Okay, so later on, we talk about the required water-saving measures. Now, this is a bit of grammar which I think is quite useful. So we could basically say this as the water-saving measures that are required. Okay, so here, what we're doing is we're using the past participle required, and we're using that to replace a non-restrictive clause. We can do this to write more concisely or to write a shorter sentence wherever there is a non-restrictive clause which modifies the subject. So an easy example would be, the homework that you were given is due tomorrow, which we could change to, the given homework is due tomorrow. So what we do there is we take that you were given, we shorten it to just the past participle given, and we move that in front of the subject. Okay, so it becomes the given homework is due tomorrow. So that way we can write much shorter sentences and much clearer sentences if you have to think about your word limit.
没错，你可以把形容词子句里面的过去分词抽出来，然后丢到名词前面去做形容，那你的形容词子句就可以把它消失不见。
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to our second sample, the advanced sample. Advanced sample. This line graph depicts the water levels of Jiayi's Zhengwen Reservoir over the course of 2020. This reservoir, the largest in Taiwan, provides much of the island's water. The green line indicates its maximum storage level, while the yellow indicates the minimum level. The blue line shows the actual water levels in the reservoir over the year. We can see from the graph that in the first half of the year, the reservoir's levels fluctuated within normal range. However, after a summer without typhoon rainfall, the level dropped below the minimum line around August. It even declined further in the last 3 months of 2020, resulting in alarming water shortages. The situation became so dire that, in certain areas, water had to be strictly rationed. Not having water readily available can seriously impact daily life. It affects how you bathe, use the toilet, clean the house, and care for plants, not to mention stay hydrated. Fortunately, there are smart ways to ration and save water. Reusing water is one. Take a bucket into the shower, save the water from washing vegetables and fruits, and save excess drinking water. It's then useful for flushing toilets, mopping floors, and nourishing plants. A water reuse habit can save a great deal in the long run, and using water-saving appliances like dishwashers, front-load washing machines, and low-flow faucets also works to great effect. It's more important than ever to be mindful of our daily water use, even in times of plenty. Okay, so this is obviously a much more detailed sample, the advanced sample. I like that they use depict as well here. So depict is a bit similar to show again. So it's another word that we can use instead of show. So the line depicts the water levels of Jiayi's Zhengwen Reservoir over the course of 2020. So Elsie, you kind of like that sentence as well, didn't you?
Right， 这边呢就没有用到这么简单的 shows， 这边用的是 depict 也就是描述。所以呢，我们看到基础版的开头是比较简单明了的，直接说明该图表显示增文水库西元2020年的水位。那进阶版这边呢，就是明确指出图表的种类 line graph， 并且补充呢对增文水库的背景知识。除此之外同样都是表达在西元2020年，但是进阶版使用 over the course of。 也就是在点点点期间，那就会为文章增加一些色彩。那再来限水的英文，这边写的是 water rationing。那基础版 What did the basic sample use?
The basic sample. With water rationing, it talked about not having access to running water and having the water cut off for a couple of days. So they talked more about what the government does, but it's a bit different here, isn't it? It talks more about how you can continue your daily life when there's water rationing.
对，所以呢，在基础的版本里面，它就没有用到 water rationing 这两个字，它用到的是the government will order water saving measures.
Exactly. Oh, yes. So there's a bit of a difference in this second paragraph from in the basic sample, in that the basic sample more talks about how life is difficult without having water, and it kind of complains a little bit about the current measures, because we get the sense from the conclusion in the basic sample, which is, I really hope society can find new ways to save water in the future, that the writer isn't so happy with the way they handle things right now. In the advanced sample, however, it focuses more on practical tips that you can use to save water. So one of them, for example, is plant water. Okay, so it says you can use the extra water from your shower or the water from washing fruits and vegetables to water your plants or mop your floors. I actually, when I water my plants, I normally put a dish underneath so I can use the water that comes out of my plants to water another plant afterwards. So then I don't have to, exactly, so you don't have to throw away the dirty water afterwards. So that's an example of rationing, which is one of, I think, the key words in this passage. And when you ration something, you give out a small quantity of resources to a group so that they can use it more conservatively over time. So when I think of rationing, I often think of rationing in the UK during World War II, which was when the government controlled how much food that the country had and how many different resources they could use. And so you could only get a certain amount of cheese, a certain amount of meat every week, so that we didn't use up all of the meat and cheese in the UK.
Right, 所以呢 rationing 这个字啊，它是从原形动词 ration 来的，它代表配给供应，对点点实施限量的供应。所以有 water rationing 这个东西，或者 food rationing， 或者是 fuel rationing， 也是可能发生的。
Yes, that also happens. Okay, that's unfortunately all the time we have for going through the advanced sample. It's a really good one, so make sure that you give it a second read through. But we are going to have to say goodbye here. It's all the time we have for today's class. So for English Digest, I'm Seb.
I'm Elsie.
And we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.